Good afternoon. In this video, I want to again go over the issue of the Confederate Constitution. This is from Lawrence Vance. And show you what a liar Robert Breaker is. You lie by omission. You leave things out. You're either on one side fighting for one constitution or you're fighting for another constitution. So you'll see the hypocrisy of the Confederacy. The one thing you see in Robert Breaker when he talks about, he says equal representation. The colonists were fighting for, they weren't fighting for equal representation. They were fighting for no taxation without representation. The South had plenty of representation. But this one, let's look at this. Here's the preface here. We, the people of the Confederate States, each state acting in its sovereign and independent character in order to form a permanent federal government, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and secure blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our prosperity. And he goes more on there. Invoking the favor and guidance of Almighty God, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the Confederate States of America. They weren't going to allow secession in their Confederacy. Permanent. So it's going to be a permanent federal government. And let's see what else we got here. Here's on page 9, he has here, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus should not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion of public safety may require it. See, they'll jump on Lincoln for suspending habeas corpus. American Constitution, the privilege of a writ of habeas corpus should not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion of public safety may require it. That means you can put a guy away for not trying for a while. You're not bound to bring him up, with a quick trial. Confederacy had it. Confederacy had it. So they make Lincoln a big tyrant because he suspended habeas corpus. It's in their Constitution too. It's a rebellion. It was a rebellion. Let's see here. In page 11, section 10, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation. Confederation. Section 10, U.S. Constitution. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation. It was illegal. You couldn't form a confederacy. It was illegal. Secession wasn't legal, you liar, Breaker. Even on their own system, they said he couldn't form another confederation. They couldn't have some states break off. It said it was a permanent federal union. And let's see here. Here's one here on page 17. The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all the privileges and immunities of citizens of the several states, and shall have the right to transit and sojourn in any state of the Confederacy with their slaves and other property, and the right of property is in said slaves shall not be thereby impaired. What does the U.S. Constitution say? The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of the citizens of the United States. Ooh, they left the word slavery out. Confederacy made sure they put it in, didn't they, people? It wasn't about slavery, though. Oh, no. The whole Constitution is filled with slavery, references to slavery. Oh, no, it wasn't about slavery. It was about that terror. Page 18. Talking about new territories. In all such territory, the institution of negro slavery as it now exists in the Confederate States shall be recognized and protected by Congress and by the territorial government, and by the inhabitants of the several Confederate States and territories shall have the rights to take to each such territory any slaves lawfully held by them in any states or territories of Confederate States. What does the U.S. Constitution have? Nothing. It's a blank there. That was what the war was over. That was what the war was over. The issue is where they can take the slaves. And they need to expand slavery because the black population was growing so much. So they said, well they stopped importing slaves. Yeah, because they didn't need any more slaves. Breaker. Law of supply and demand. That's why. they were against that. So there you got some stuff about slavery written directly into their Constitution, making sure that slavery was written into their Constitution and protected by the Constitution. That was the issue that made the federal government permanent. So there was no argument, no secession. Secession was legal. No, it wasn't. Secession is revolution. That's the last resort. But it's not legal. It's the idea, well, okay, we've reached a final point. But they had representation. But the words that come out of his mouth are typical neo-Confederate guys. They always twist, lie, distort. And a lot of what he does with the Bible. Twist, twist and distorts. He learns that. Equal representation. No taxation without equal. No, that's what wasn't the colonists' cry. It was no taxation without representation. They weren't represented in Parliament at all. At all. The South was represented in Congress. No, so there you go. There's the original source. This is the Confederate Constitution. Go on one side or the other. What you got the guys is a bunch of liars who tell you want to rewrite history, just like Antifa. Tear down statues of great men like Grant and Lincoln. Let's see. Talking about the Confederate Constitution here, page 301 in the Patriot's History of the United States. The new Confederate Constitution, over which Jefferson Davis presided, prohibited tariffs, subsidies to businesses, and most taxation, and required that all appropriation bills be passed by 2/3 majority. This seemed to be a surface quite Jeffersonian. Other provisions were not so Jeffersonian. The CSA Constitution granted de facto subsidies to slave owners, though he externalized costs passed off to non-slave holders the enforcement expenses of slavery, such as paying posse and court costs. So if you own a slave, you're paying the slave owners the court costs and the posse costs to keep the slaves in line, subsidizing them. And the Constitution ensured that censorship would only get worse. Oh, these guys are free people. Yeah, they shut down discussion of slavery in Congress and in the Senate. He won't tell you that, because he's a liar. That's what they do. They lie. Although there was provision for a Supreme Court, the Confederate Congress never established one, and the court system that existed tended to support the centralized power of the Confederate government rather than restrict it. Certainly there was no check on the Congress or the President from complying courts. As would become clear during the war, the absence of such checks in the Confederate Constitution gave Davis virtually unlimited power. So who was the dictator? Who was the dictator? Davis had virtually unlimited power. He did everything Lincoln did without any checks on him. Lincoln had to run for re-election. Davis didn't, because it was 6 years in the Constitution. So he basically hadn't even have to worry about being re-elected, including a line item veto. The document reflected in many ways a Southern abstraction of what differentiated the sections of the Union. Yeah, they put in the idea that you couldn't stop slavery from expanding into the Union. The whole idea of slave. And that's why you have PBI guys going to 1 Corinthians 6:20 and trying to put the word servant there and make it slave. King James only guys. They call it a servant. And he had the whole 2-hour video talking about how the word servant really means slave. 1 Corinthians 6:20. As if you're redeemed with a price means you were bought into slavery. No, you're free from slavery. But they can't stand that idea. They can't stand. You're freed from the slavery of Satan and brought into the family of God. You're freed, not put into slavery. That's where the word servant is there. But they changed the word. Look at Buckman's Segregated, little booklet on segregation. All of a sudden, the word servant there becomes slave. It doesn't say servant, it says slave. It doesn't say slave, it says servant. So I'm going to stop this up real quick. Demoralize this guy's lives. And you say, oh, it wasn't a big deal. He made a big deal. He attacked the truth. He attacked the facts. He wants to put this web of lies around his ancestors, this idea that the Christians in the South were just so noble that they weren't abusing the slaves, and that this abuse of slaves is overblown, and slavery was eventually going to end, and so the war wasn't necessary, blah blah blah. And secession was legal. They didn't even have their own constitution. That's what a lie does. He picks out what he wants you to see, and then he ignores the other stuff, ignores his truth. Lincoln came in, the first inaugural, read the first inaugural from Lincoln. He said, I can't touch slaves. I can't touch it. But that wasn't their issue. Their issue was they wanted to expand, because slavery, the blacks began to outnumber, just like in Egypt, with Israel. The Egyptians became scared of the Israelites. That's why they put that decree in there to kill the males. They were afraid now, because they were outpopulating the Egyptians, and they had the same fear with the blacks. So I'll put this up and look at some other things, and check more lies out. The guy will lie to you about this, he'll lie about everything, and he does. And he does it with a smile on his face. He does it with a smile on his face, and you people just lap it up. Mostly his followers lap it up, because this is a way of learning that is just very, and the same thing with other theology, like faith works in the Old Testament and there's other stuff. It's very superficial. It just ignores scriptures you want to ignore, use proof texts that don't match what they say they're supposed to, and ignore the overall plan of God, the idea that God can't allow works in the system. It's all grace, can't be works. Just ignore it. Just ignores that fact. But he'll do video after video after video on that, defending that, and do video after video defending this nonsense about the Civil War where the South was right. The South wasn't right. And they were controlled by a very small proportion of people. The guy who writes in this, and okay, I can find the page now, he writes about how it was the vote, how many of the people stayed home and didn't vote on the issue of secession. And let's see. And many of the states passed it very closely. Let's see. Okay, let's see here. Aside from South Carolina, let's see, he said manipulated the election in order to have caused the man to be elected by a sectional vote, thereby proving the Union was as divided as they claimed. He's talking based on one of the fight leaders. Stephen Douglas lambasted the movement as an enormous conspiracy formed by the leaders of the secession movement 12 months ago. Fight eaters, he said, manipulated the election in order to have caused the man to be elected by a sectional vote, thereby proving the Union was as divided as they claimed. However, evidence paints a more complex picture. Aside from South Carolina and Texas, the vote in secession was quite close. In Mississippi, for example, the secessionists defeated the cooperationists by fewer than 5,000 votes. January secession conventions in other states produced even smaller pro-secession margins. Secession carried in Georgia by 3,500 ballots and Louisiana by 1,200. Nowhere in the South did the vote on secession approximate the numbers who had gone to the polls for the presidential election. See the need for voting? It's like midterm elections when people don't vote for midterms. Here, this is a crucial vote, and these people didn't come out to vote. And if they were for the union, their vote could have kept their state in the union. Let's see. Making a pro-secession vote even less of a mandate. Nevertheless, Douglas's conspiracy interpretation did not account for the fact that the secession votes forces won the elections, no matter how narrowly and no matter how light the vote, underscoring the old adage that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing, or in the case of an election, stay home. That's what these guys are telling you to do with Trump. Stay home, don't vote, and you see what the government you'll get. That's what the people do in midterms. That's why the other government, the Democrats were so successful in 2018. So now we see what happened in Congress and a lot of these DAs being elected and all this stuff. People stay home; they're too lazy to vote. More important, the winner-take-all system led to an unanimous agreement by the states of the Lower South to send delegates to a February convention in Montgomery. As an Alabamian put it, we are no longer one people. A paper parchment order holds us together, and as soon as that bond is severed, the better will be for both parties. In fact, secession had been railroaded even more forcibly than the final state convention votes suggested. There was no popular referendum anywhere in the South. So this much for democracy. They don't put it up to a popular vote referendum. Conventions made up of delegates selected by the legislature elected 854 men, 154 of whom voted against secession. Put in the starkest terms, some 697 men, mostly wealthy, decided the destiny of 9 million people, mostly poor and 1/3 enslaved. The circumstances of secession thus lend some credence to the position that when war finally came, many Southerners fought out of the duty to their state. Indeed, many saw themselves as upholding constitutional principle. Yeah, they were fighting for the state. That's the local government. They wouldn't even understand what was going on with the high issues. And no one ever said they were. They put this idea, these guys are fighting, therefore, because they were fighting for their states. That means that the war wasn't about slavery. Oh, no, the war was about slavery. For the guys who put the secession argument through. That's the issue. See, this is one thing about people can't think, can't hold two thoughts at one time. Because the individual Confederate thought he was fighting for his state, and not slavery, does not mean that the secession itself was not put through for the case in order to expand slavery. But that's too complex for them. The leaders were voting to expand slavery. The average individual was fighting to defend his own state. That's where his loyalty lied. And so, in order to blame the Confederate soldier, that's what these hypersensitive, paranoid nuts, and they said strawmen said, the Yankees think all these Confederates were pro-slavery. No one said that. No one ever said that. And that's what they say, you ever learn history, the war was about slavery, and the Confederates, and all these Confederate soldiers were fighting. They don't teach that. I hate to bust your bubble, but that's not what they teach. They teach the Confederate soldier was fighting for his home. He got caught up in the war. People, just like Lee, Virginia was going to fight for the South, so he joined Virginia. But that doesn't mean they weren't fighting. The war itself wasn't at its root for slavery, because the leaders of the secession movement decided to secede based on the issue that they had to expand slavery into territories. But they'll take the issue of the soldier. What did the average soldier fighting for? And see, they weren't fighting for slavery. So the war wasn't about slavery. And then they'll go to the North. And they'll say, see, the North wasn't really fighting to end slavery, which was true. Initially, they weren't. They were trying to preserve the Union. So the war wasn't about slavery. You see that? You see how illogical these people are? See how logical people are. The South, the leaders of the South who led the secessionist movement were fighting to expand slavery. That's why they seceded when Lincoln got elected. No one's saying the average Confederate soldier was fighting to keep slavery, because they didn't have slaves. Likewise, the North, the Northern armies, the generals, they were not intending to end slavery. they were tending to preserve the Union. Even Lincoln. See, they went to him and said, Lincoln, we didn't want to do this. See, it wasn't about slavery. It wasn't about slavery. But eventually it did come about slavery in the North because they said this war can't end until slavery is dealt with. But this is the type of thinking, simplistic, naive, slick thinking they get because they can show you these things, these little facts, and ignore other facts of what the Southern leadership were fighting for, that led to the war, and eventually what led to the North end slavery. Just say we got to end it because this war basically is now. Lincoln to say we got to end slavery because this is constantly going to be an issue unless we find the end. The Democratic Party was not for ending slavery. When they ran against Lincoln, they said their only goal was to preserve the Union. Democratic Party, when they ran against Lincoln, and when the Emancipation Proclamation came out, the Democrats, who were loyal to the Union still, resisted it. They had no intention of fighting the free slaves. They said our only goal was to preserve the Union. And that was the platform they ran on against Lincoln. We just want to rejoin back up with the South, and this war they had no intention of ending slavery. They said it's constitutional and we don't intend to end it. But Lincoln said, look, we got to end it now, once and for all. But what these guys do is clever maneuver facts. And they say, oh, the simplistic thing. The Yankees, they just think the war, everybody in the Confederacy was for slavery, and to see they weren't really for slavery, so therefore the war wasn't about slavery. And the people in the North also, they think the Yankees began the war to end slavery, but they really didn't see Lincoln was No, we don't taught that. We have a little bit understanding of a little complex thinking, objective thinking, that these guys don't have. These guys, they just want the simplistic thing. They purposely set up this straw man simplistic way of thinking in order to set up their arguments to prove their point. See, the average Confederate soldier didn't own any slaves. He was just fighting to defend himself from the invading Union armies. See, the Union had no intention of ending slavery. They weren't fighting to end slavery. See, the war wasn't about slavery. It was for the guys who voted to secede in the South. And eventually became an issue about in the North. And when Lincoln won that war, won the election, he won because the Union Army, the soldiers, now accepted, because the more the deeper they went south, the more they saw slavery. The more the Union soldiers got into the South, and they saw the abuses of slavery and the horror of slavery, they became determined to end slavery. This idyllic thing, everyone was treated well. Jeff Davis, he treated slaves well. Treated slaves well. Says that. No one argues about that. People treated some of this. People treated us. No one ever argued about that. But there were many masters who didn't, and other people didn't know what was going on in these other plantations. And they would sell them and divide families and sell people apart. So let's not put this up, little objectivity there, and show how when you have a simplistic, naive individual like Robert Breaker, and they pull up on these guys with who teach these neo-Confederate lies. That's how they do it. And they beguile people who don't understand what the complexity of what's going on. Oh yeah, those Confederate soldiers, they weren't fighting to defend slavery, so war wasn't about slavery. Union soldiers, they were, initially they were just, they came in. Lincoln didn't want to end slavery, blah blah blah. Yeah, that's all true. See, that's how they lead you. And so wait a second. The cause of the war was over slavery, because that's what the secessionists were upset about Lincoln getting elected. And that's why they have it in their Constitution that the expansion of slavery cannot be stopped. And that's why you see the word slave constantly through their Constitution. It's not in the American Constitution. Why? Because the founding fathers never intended slavery to exist forever. That's why the word slavery isn't in the Constitution. That's why the word slavery isn't in the King James Bible as instead of servant. Why servant is used instead. And Whipping talks about that. Modern versions have slaves with slavery, as if you lose your free will. But let me stop and put this up. Amen. Thank you.